Hi, I'm Kelly Forden. Welcome to Let's Deconstruct a Story. Today I'm talking to Susan Shepard about her story Baboons, which was published first in the Kenyon Review and then in Best American Short Stories 2024. Susan's writing has been published in the Boston Globe, Ploughshares, Story Magazine, the Chicago Quarterly, the Kenyon Review, One Story, Swamp Pink, and Best American Short Stories. Her story Goats, Ploughshares, was a distinguished story in Best American Short Stories 2021, and she is currently at work on a linked collection based on the story Baboons and some of the other stories. We'll be talking about that with her today. Aside from writing, she works as a producer and reporter, and her work has aired on multiple national public radio shows, including Living on Earth and Marketplace. Her show, 11 Central Avenue, a radio comic strip, aired on select NPR stations on Morning Edition around the country. 11 Central Avenue won a gold medal for Best Comedy from the New York Festivals and a National Gracie Allen Award for Best Producer Comedy. Welcome to the show, Susan Shepard. Welcome, Susan Shepard. I'm so excited to talk to you about Baboons, which I absolutely loved. Thank you for coming.
So glad to do this. It's really fun.
So I always start with the same question, which is the story's genesis, how the idea first came to you.
So a couple of things. So this is part of a collection of linked stories. And one of my early stories was called Snakes that was published in the Chicago Review. And in that story, there was a stepdad from Kenya who kept snakes as pets. So I really liked that character. And then I didn't even really think of this as a book, for the first 3, 4, or 5 stories. But then once I started writing more stories with these characters, I wanted to bring him back. And also, there is or has been a large encampment in Boston of people living in tents. And a lot of them are drug addicts and have mental health issues and things like that. A friend of mine is a reporter and she was covering it. It was in the news a lot. And, I had a lot of conversations with her about it. And I spend a lot of time camping in beautiful places, in tents, and the dichotomy between those tents and what tents are for, or what most of us use tents for, which is to be out in nature and in beauty. And then what this encampment was like, that sort of set the story up in my mind. So one of the stories in the collection that just came out in the Harvard Review is from the main character, Guy's point of view. And early in the story, he looks out the window. He hears a woodpecker banging on like the metal fascia of the house. And he looks out the window to find it. And he's like, I don't understand why the little guy is doing this. We have so many trees. There are a million trees. And I realize that that's kind of what the theme of my whole book is how we as humans spend so much of our time and energy on things that are not beautiful, that don't do us well, like that aren't good for us, that aren't beautiful. And, we've got all these trees and all this beauty, community and nature and all of this other stuff sort of like standing on the sidelines waving, going, we're here. Why aren't you noticing us? And so, yeah.
Wow. So you've got, when you're doing the link collection, you have Guy's perspective and do you have Ellie's and you have Ivy's and, or how does it work? How does it work?
I did have Ellie's perspective in one story. I think I'm going to cut that out of the book because I'm trying to make it more like a novel. Mm-hmm. So there are stories that I think I'm going to have to leave on the floor. And that may be one of them. But so now the book is mainly about these 2 women who meet as children. They're in a plane wreck together. They don't know each other. They're traveling with their fathers and their plane goes down in the ocean and they're in a lifeboat and they get surrounded by dolphin and these terns that come out of the sky, like thousands of them. And they think that this is a miracle. And then those 2 girls remain friends for life. And so the book essentially follows those 2 women and is mostly told from one or the other's point of view. Although Sometimes it's close third, sometimes it's first. I think the last story is omniscient.
And then the locations, especially in this book, I was curious about the Kenya location. I know your background, you've traveled a lot for work. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how Kenya became a part of the story?
It's funny because there are a lot of locations in this book. There's one that takes place on an island in New Zealand on a sheep farm, and there's a story that takes place in Russia, and there are several that take place in Mexico, Costa Rica. So anyway, there's a lot of different places in the book. So I go to Kenya a lot because my husband is actually from Kenya.
Okay.
So that is one of the places that I love to write about.
I mean, it's amazing. I was there once, a very long time ago. But so it's easy. It's funny. I had heard this, and I was going to bring it up in the writing prompts in the second hour. But I'd heard Jeffrey Eugenides say that when he was writing Middlesex, it was such a leap of imagination to capture the main character that it was easier to put all the locations in places where he was very familiar. So that would have been Grosse Pointe, Michigan for him. Is that kind of how Kenya came about? Like, it's just something that you're super familiar with?
Kenya's it's just so beautiful. You want to write about it. But a lot of the places I wrote about, I've actually never been to. So,
oh, interesting. Okay. That's very cool.
Yeah, I like to do that too.
You do? Okay.
I've never been to New Zealand, and there's a story published in one story about, in this collection that took place in New Zealand on a sheep farm. And I just, because then you get to do the research and
right. So what was involved in the research? I'm curious.
Someone wrote a memoir, which is unbelievably beautiful. This woman in the 1950s who lived on a sheep farm by herself off of New Zealand. And it was really difficult. Everything about her life was really difficult. And she wrote this beautiful memoir about it.
Wow.
She was almost murdered by someone. And I can't remember what it was called, but I'll tell you later if you want to put it in.
I would love it. Yeah.
So I like to do that kind of research.
Okay. So it's interesting in this story, we don't get a lot of backstory on Piper and Guy. We do know, like, you have to pick up the clues. First of all, she knows exactly where to look. And how do you say is it Melnia Cass? Okay. Melnia Cass. So she knows where to look, and she says things very casually, like, normally he turns up, or, we can tell she has been through this before, but we don't get a lot about her and a lot about his background. I think we find out about Kenya about halfway through the story. So I'm curious about your decision to just sort of enter in the middle of it and be very mysterious with their background.
I can say why I entered in the middle of it, because I wanted the reader, I felt like the immediacy of that, with the reader sort of following Piper and knowing what she knows when she knows it. Like, I liked that idea of just like, boom, we're just going. Mm-hmm. And this story just mostly got written the way it is. It's not that I didn't do a lot of edits, but just in terms of it pretty much had this structure from the beginning. I did make one major change, which was the first draft alternated between the tents of Melnia Cass and the tents in Kenya. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that, because that was the genesis of the story, is that idea of those two different tents. So I liked the sort of going back and forth. It would be really cinematic. And then I sent it to my friend Bud Smith. He's a phenomenal writer who everyone should read. He has a story out right now in the Paris Review. And he's read all the stories in this book first before anyone else. And he said, you should think about making this chronological.
Interesting.
So then I did, and I liked it. So
I imagine that it was much easier to follow, when it's chronological, because you're kind of two different locations that not a lot of people are familiar with. So it might have been hard to go back and forth.
I haven't read that first draft for a while, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
So it's interesting. You say, there's a marked contrast, obviously, between the human hell of the Boston drug encampment and the wild natural world of Kenya. And you say that Melnia Cass encampment is a place for people who didn't belong. And it's a man-made, insidious, psychologically dangerous place. Whereas Kenya is very beautiful, but it is also filled with all these primal dangers: lions, buffaloes, snakes, and scorpions. The danger seemed straightforward in Kenya, whereas the danger is sort of self-imposed in Boston. So I'm just curious, when you were going back and forth between these two different encampments and the positions that people found themselves in these different situations, what were you thinking about danger in general and the danger we put ourselves in, or the danger that is just around us as animals?
So, well, that's a good way to look at it. So, Piper is really aware and sort of overwhelmed by the idea of keeping her family safe. And you can see that in how crazy she is through this whole story.
Yeah.
And she can't, she clearly can't keep Guy safe. Her daughter is growing up and doing whatever her daughter's going to do. And, she is really aware of that. And so I think sort of just like for Piper, who's because this is close third, it's really from her point of view. She just kind of sees danger everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's the jackals who is taking care of her babies, and then the hippo and her babies. And so you have all these parallels in the natural world. And what about the baboons? I'm curious about that whole scene, having no background in baboon pooping. I didn't know if that was a territorial moment or what they were, or were they being funny, or were they just saying, get out of here?
Really know why baboons do that. So I can't why baboons actually do it, but I do love the idea that this is, this family, they're really a bunch of baboons, right? This family.
Yeah, yeah, they are.
Yeah, and Guy even calls them that at one point.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes on that. Yeah. So Guy actually calls them a troop of baboons at one point. And they seem to me, this family, to be people who can't, even in a most fundamental way, really comfort each other.
Right. I got that sense. They're all operating in their separate orbits.
Right. And, even you asked me a question on paper about the snake biting Piper. Mm-hmm. He bites her in the face and Guy gets mad at her. And it's like, even just that basic level of comforting, of Guy being able to comfort.
Right. It's not there.
It's not there. Even though, I see him as a very tender-hearted person. It's not that I don't see this man as being, mean or anything like that. He just is, he's in his own world, and mm-hmm. he's not really that aware a lot of the time of what's happening around him in that respect.
Yeah, and to him, this is probably all normal because he grew up there. So he's thinking why are you behaving this? Why are you taking these risks? And was that part of the part where he is, he obviously has this addiction, and there's a lot in that scene about the Cambodian guy says something about I can share, and he has this beatific look on his face. And so is that because Guy is missing home? He's longing for something. He feels displaced. I'm just wondering what appeals to him about this world, of Melnia Cass. And
I think that's just the great mystery to Piper.
Yeah.
That's what she just cannot,
right.
The character cannot understand that.
And maybe there's not a lot behind it. I mean, once you're addicted, right? And it's just very simple. You can't get out.
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I do feel like Piper is always trying to come up with an answer, and she's exhausted.
Yeah.
There may not be an answer, or maybe there's an answer, but it's out of her control, or,
right.
out of her ken.
Why does his sponsor say, you're going to Kenya? Why would you go to, why does he consider that such a big risk? Because I would think that's at least getting away from the drugs, and maybe it would be harder to get drugs. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's easier.
I think that was a bit of a throwaway line, but I think that what he would be thinking would be, you're just running away from what needs to be done here.
Mm-hmm.
She is.
Right.
So.
Right. He needs to go to rehab. He doesn't need to go to Kenya. Right.
She's just like, well, I can't make him do that, but I'm not missing this trip. I mean, that's, obviously that's like level one of why she goes.
Right.
But there are levels below that about, maybe if he goes without her, she won't stay with him.
Right.
Maybe if he goes without her, she won't be able to hold the family together, which seems to be, I think from my point of view, it seems to me that Piper's main feeling is she just really wants to hold this family together and take care of these kids, but also, make sure that Guy doesn't die. So.
Right. Yeah. And at one point, she says something that leads us to believe that she's doing this for Ellie. And I wondered if that was because Ellie wanted to go to Kenya, or she thinks Ellie needs to go to Kenya. Ellie needs to be with them all. She's at that pivotal point.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Piper just thinks we need something nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was such a high-low contrast in that when they go to that luxurious encampment, and then he's, struggling in the streets of Boston, you do say that she could barely afford this. So I got the impression that she's got the steady job. Maybe she's the one earning more money. His seemed like it was sort of a gig job, where freelance, I know, doesn't earn that much in most careers. So is that true? Like, do you picture her running the show and that way?
In the story that is from his point of view, we don't get in too much into this in the book, but the story that is from his point of view, he is a successful consultant in that story. But he goes on a caper essentially to Russia, because as a consultant, he does get gigs, but he's a scientist and, works with pharmaceutical companies. So it's not made in the rest of the book to seem like she's really supporting them financially.
Okay.
Yeah. It's more.
It's more even.
Right.
Okay. I mean, she just seemed like the more stable partner. So I think I just assumed that was on her too.
There's not a lot about that in the book.
So. Okay. Interesting. So there are all these different relationships too. I mean, there's the relationship between Ivy and Ellie. There's Guy and Piper. Then there's their individual relationships with their daughters. I just assumed that Ellie, I mean, you portrayed her perfectly as this teenager who, like, every word her mom says disgusts her. And that's just so perfect, right? And then she's into her own beauty, and Moses is attracted to her, and that all starts up. And then Ivy, worships her and just wants to be with Ellie. I was wondering about you. Well, you've already said that you just sort of wrote the story and you had all these characters in mind. But in your mind, what do each of these characters bring to the story?
Well, so, Ellie is about to be launched, I guess, but that also has its own, she's at such an impressionable age in certain ways, I think, in terms of a teenager being in a situation like this. For a teenager who's about to be launched, for her family to fall apart, I think would be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way Piper would see it. And Ivy, who just adores all of them and is so young, I think it's alluded to in this story that they could lose custody of her, or that, it
would break everything up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the one, Ellie gets it because she scoffs at the latter comment, and Ivy's the more innocent. So it's kind of cool in a way how they're trying to protect each of them. So this story obviously I had that question about, was it always told from Piper's point of view? And it always was. There is a distance from her throughout the story, though, and I've had the feeling that she was trying not to think.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. This is a really dysfunctional group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got that.
So
no, they're like right on the precipice.
Yes, they are. Yeah. So I think in her shoes, that's how I would be. I mean, I guess, I always try to put myself into my stories in one way or another. And I think, given a situation like this, if I was in a dysfunctional, where things were not just out in the open, which they clearly aren't here.
Mm-hmm.
People are not discussing things like, let's sit down and decide what to do. Nobody does that. They're
Right.
going. And, so you would see that she wouldn't really want to be thinking too closely.
Right. Like there's that one moment where she considers like, is this the moment when I'm going to leave him? But aside from that, we don't get a lot of her interiority about him. And the only solution I could come up with was, okay, we're in close third person. She could clearly be thinking about this constantly, but she must be pushing it out, which is so cool in a way.
And then you brought up the thing about the other dangers. And I think the other dangers are in some ways so much more manageable, like the buffalo and the baboons and the...
Right. That reminds me of a question I wanted to ask about the baboons. So when when Guy tells that story about the baboons and the lion, and then and then he starts banging the pot, and then they start. So what were they? So they were hiding. There's a lot about the story in the story about animals hiding. So they were clearly hiding from the lion, and then he starts banging on that pot. And then they start making noise. So I was like, what's happening? Yeah. So he just wanted them to come back to life, or he wanted to
trying to get rid of the lion. He was trying to scare the lion away.
Okay. And then they were like, okay, we'll join in and help you out with this. Okay. Instead of hiding, like someone here needs to be brave. So, okay. So you have so much animal symbolism. I think I've gone over, McCoy. That is so fascinating. The first part of the story where the police are willing to look for McCoy and everybody still has so much sympathy for an animal who's put in that situation, but they are just done with addicts and their sympathy is dried up for people.
Yeah,
so
quite a stunning moment. Yeah.
Did you do a lot of research on addiction for this?
Addiction is just everywhere. Like, if you can get to be at this point in life, not to know something about it. So,
did you know any policemen who told you stories about, you just sort of imagined your way into, that's how I would feel. Yeah. It's cool to know that you can do that still. Some people are very hesitant about getting into other people's heads. But I think Joyce Carol Oates came to visit our library one time, and I asked her a question, and I said, how do you allow yourself to get into so many different people's heads? And she said, I guess I just don't allow myself. And I was like, I think she just does it. She doesn't think about, is it okay for me to do this? And obviously, we rightly are concerned about co-opting someone else's experience.
I don't know. I just can't think about that.
Yeah, I know, because you can't tell.
I just have to write what I'm writing. I can't think about with her. But I will say about the dog, like there are people who are just dog crazy. And if you leave your dog in the car in a 50-degree weather, they'll come after you.
Right. Yeah.
So it is true that a dog left in a car raises a lot of people's...
Yes.
Even if it's not hot.
Right. Exactly.
And that has happened to me, that I've left a dog in a car in the cool weather and somebody's been like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah. I've been afraid that was going to happen to me, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay. Let me just make sure I'll wrap this up and then we'll open up to the Q&A. Can you tell me a little bit about the Maasai tradition? I know technically. I thought that was a very interesting scene where the Maasai woman helps Ellie. I didn't write her name down here, but
thinks that her name is Nalari, I think. So I think the idea behind that was sort of a juxtaposition between how crazed Piper makes herself and how she doesn't have to do that. Perhaps
she could just take care of it,
or she's not living her right life. And I think, she keeps saying over and over how she feels like she's on the outside. And it's almost like, oh, she's just like this whirling dervish,
Right.
needing all this wind around her that she doesn't need to be creating. And then there's this woman, Nalari, who like lives in a boma. And,
Right.
you know,
And she just takes care of it.
right. And so I liked that juxtaposition, but I also, I don't know, sometimes I just like to go off on a little bit of a tangent when I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
Give everybody a rest. Just,
I've heard that from more people that I've talked to on this program, how they just sort of leave something strange in the story or something irrelevant in the story. And it does give the story a feeling of real life rather than the characters being propelled from one action to the next. Okay, I wanted to discuss the ending. How did you know you had reached the end of the story? And I loved the image of him as the golden boy in the pool of light. And I thought that it boded well for them, but then again, then I started thinking about a river runs through it and how there's that moment where he catches the fish and it's a perfect moment, but it certainly doesn't bode well for that character, the Brad Pitt character. So I'm curious how you came to that ending.
so I love the snake and the kids and Guy going after the snake is from Piper's point of view, all of the sadness she feels about Guy. Because this is who he should be, and it's not. Because he's killing himself. And so for her, I think she just sees that so clearly. She, like the little boy wonder, the kids, the beauty of all of this, the fact that he just goes after this snake with so much loveliness, like he's just lovely in this scene, and he's killing himself. And so for her, that's completely heartbreaking. And it kind of sums up this whole whirling dervish that she is and that she can't get herself out of, because really it's about love, right? She doesn't know what to do with love in a situation where the person is killing himself. And so that's really what the story is about. And the ending kind of epitomizes that, with him standing there in that pool of sunlight with all the kids around him. And like, why? It's just why isn't this
the way it always is?
Why isn't this the way it always is?
Yeah. And it's
and how little control she has and how much she tries.
Right.
Control and doesn't and can't, but from her point of view, how do you let go of that?
Right.
No.
It's heartbreaking. Okay, a couple other people have joined us. I think I'll open up now, and if anyone has any questions, you could put them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask away. I'm sure I didn't get to everything.
I was really interested in the conversation that began to speak to the comment by Joyce Carol Oates about what does it mean to get into other people's heads. It was one of the comments you made. And an associated question I have is, character development is something that, like plot, is very well planned. But I was really interested in the fact that you already had these characters in mind from what I heard almost before you began to write the story. So I'm just really interested in that. Character development is something that's easy for me to work with, or easier anyway. But character embodiment, to come in to a story with the confidence that you know your characters and are making them authentic from the get-go. So I'd be interested if you wanted to address that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the stories that I love most. When I'm reading them from the very beginning, you feel this sense of that the author has authority. And the authority seems to me to come from the authority of understanding the character and being in the character's head. So I think if you're going to write, you need to just go marching into that. You can't tiptoe into feeling like you're in the character's head, or else it's not going to, I don't think as a reader that I believe characters when the writers don't have that authority. So I think it's a really important point.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all you did
I mean,
today.
does that ring true for you as a writer, or what do you think?
It's something I struggle with and I'm working on. Like you say, the confidence lends credence.
Yeah, it does. I definitely think it does. I mean, the stories that I like the most, I feel like oftentimes there is that.
That leads me to, so what's your background, Susan, in writing? Because when I was talking to Deb Olin Unferth, she said something similar about how she doesn't have confidence in every aspect of her life, but for some unknown reason, she's always had confidence in her writing. And I'm just curious, did you always feel that way, or when did you start writing? And
No, I always wanted to be a writer, and I just read a lot as a child, and as most writers do, I've read a ton, and I always liked to read. I started writing as a nonfiction. I wrote about science and nature, and I wrote some screenplays, and I wrote some thing I called a radio comic strip, which is called 11 Central Ave, which you can actually get. You can get it as a podcast. So that was a family in a kitchen in the morning, sort of talking about whatever a family might be talking about. So immigration or divorce or whatever, like just silly things or important things, but talking about it in the way a family who was rushing around in the morning might be. And it was 3 minutes. And so in that, I had to really think about what was happening in the world and then immediately turn it into, because that was supposed to be very topical. It aired in Morning Edition, around the time that people were talking about that issue. So, I've always felt fairly comfortable writing, even though it's the hardest thing I've ever done.
and so you've been writing fiction for many years?
Writing fiction for a long time, but not a lot of fiction. I mean, this book is my kind of first foray into writing fiction in this form of fiction. Right.
And how far are you along in the?
I finished, but I'm now rewriting it and trying to make it more of a novel and less of a linked collection.
Okay. And what's the thought process behind that? You thought it should be?
I think it's a better book. I think the way I'm rewriting it makes it a better book.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So there's only one story from Piper growing up. And she says, a short time later, the earring miraculously found by Ivy, Piper sweated over her child's face as she tried to get the post into the rapidly closing nose hole. And she remembered when she got her own ears pierced, which she was never allowed to do, only after promising her mother, a diehard smoker, she would never smoke cigarettes, a promise she kept for 5 short months until she went away to acting camp where everyone was older and everyone smoked. And I was just thinking about how parents, despite her being this whirling dervish and trying to protect everybody, cannot protect their children from making the very same mistakes that they have made. And because you didn't give us much about her background, I thought it must have been a crucial thing to just bring in that one little detail about her own mother.
So what I think that moment is really about is again, this issue of keeping your children safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's just something that really preoccupies Piper.
Okay.
And so it's something that all parents are always trying to do, but it's sort of that is what gets passed down from one, through the generations, is like mothers really trying to keep their children safe. The parents, both parents, obviously, but this is about a mother passing that sort of on. And, because the thing she's trying to get her daughter not to do is smoke.
Right, exactly. But she's doing it. So it's like, yeah, do what I say, not what I do.
Right. The futility of trying to keep our children safe.
Yeah. Well, that really comes through throughout the whole story. Is there anything that I didn't get to that you thought I might mention? Any themes that I missed in the story?
And no, I think we really covered the themes really well. You sent great questions.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining.